Okay. We learned today we are going to travel today for about 1,000 years. This is taking me longer than I anticipated. But I think I hope it's been worthwhile for you and educational for you before we actually begin Pirke Avot to see where we come from. We're going to go from the time period just after the Talmud. I mentioned briefly at the end last week about the Savoraim. Go with the Savoraim. We're going to talk about the Gaonim and then the Rishonim, which will bring us from approximately year 500 to approximately year 1500s. Okay, and I want to touch on again. If this, I keep saying that, I know it's like sick of hearing it already. If this were a history class, we'd be spending a lot more time on this because it also dig down more into some of the personalities that we're talking about. We'll talk about 2 or 3 because they become extremely critical in the area of halakha, which we're going to talk about today. Yeah, of course.
At the time, was that called? Were they called that after?
No, so the Tanaim and the Amorim were already at that time period were called that. And as far as the Rishonim and the Acharonim weren't until later. It's like saying during World War I, they called it the Great War, the Big War, right? Because they didn't know it was World War II. But it's a very good question. But they were called Tanaim already. They're referred to that already as in the Gemara Tana and Amora. But it's not until later, obviously, that hindsight we know who the Rishonim were, and we'll see the time period what that was. So what happened was, remember that the Talmud is finished about the year 500. For the next approximately 100 years, even people who know Jewish history pretty well kind of have a blank when it comes to this next 100-year period. That's called the Savoraim. They pretty much smoothed over the rough edges of the Talmud as it was edited by the final 2, Ravina and Rav Ashi. And they came up with certain takanot and all, but really we don't need to know about that today. The next major time period is the Gaonim. Now, in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, the word Gaon means genius. Sometimes it's used derogatory, like Gaon. I sometimes say, "Come here, Einstein." I was sitting at someone's Shabbat table in Chicago many years ago, Friday night, and the father said to this little girl who's probably in her upper 20s by now, or 30s, said something about very good move there, Einstein. It's like it stuck in my head, so I kind of use that with students sometimes. Anyways, so for the next period of time, so we're talking now approximately the year 600 to the year, let's just round it up, 1,000. It's not, there's nothing really that's exact here, but approximately 600 to 1,000. We have the heads of the academies in Babylonia, are called the Gaonim. That was their title. It's not because they were geniuses, even though they were, but that was their actual title. So that someone that lived in the time of the Gaonic period meant that they lived at the time when these heads of the academy were called Gaonim instead of Rosh Yeshiva or Reish Galuta or some other title, which you talked about. And what is the mark? What is the highlight of this time period? You're talking 400 years, approximately 4. It's a long time. Again, when we talk about the big picture Jewish history or even history, 400 years, okay, it's whatever. But again, put yourself in 400 years ago. Now was in the 1600s. Go back 400 years. You're in the 1600s, the 17th century, and think of all the things that have happened since then. So during this 400-year period of time, approximately, there are names that you'll be familiar with. And again, I'm not going to go into any biographies of these people right now. You've heard of Hai Gaon, of Sadi Gaon, of Amram Gaon. These people, what was the main highlight of these 400 years? Keep in mind, and I don't mean this facetiously, there is no internet. There is no internet. You can't look up in a book yet, because other than the Mishnah, keep in mind, this is really critical to keep in mind. Other than the Mishnah and now the Talmud, but especially there's no book yet to look up the halachot of something. What are the rules of something? So we still don't have chapter and verse, so to speak, of a rule book. Yes, we have the Talmud, but it's vast, 2,711 pages as we have it today. So we still don't have this kind of a book. So people are not sure what to do. So they write letters. They write letters to their Gaonim, to the heads of the academy. And the academy heads sometimes do know, and sometimes they're not sure, and they correspond. But these letters are not just in Bavel. These letters are coming from all over the world to Babylonia, Persia, Iraq. And the questions are coming back and forth. What do we do in this case? What do we do in that case? And it begins the basis for a set of literature to this day called Shutim. Stands for She'elot uchuvot. Responsa, responsum, so Latin, singular responsa, plural, but questions and answers. You could have, yeah, you're gonna say Babylonia, yeah. Mm-hmm. It hasn't moved yet towards Spain. That's going to be coming up in the 1400s, 1300, 1400s, which we're going to get to. But so yeah, the central focus still is Babel. So these letters are going back and forth, literally thousands and thousands of letters. Imagine every time you had a question, you didn't necessarily have a rabbi, in quotes, to ask. So what did you do? You wrote a letter to the Gaon, and he would send you a letter back. Over the course of time, these letters were compiled. They became books. Now, there's still at this point, we're still talking handwritten books. There's yet to be a printing press. It's not until the end of the 15th century that the first Hebrew books are being printed, late in the 1400s, I think 1480, 1470. I have it written down. When we get to it, we'll talk about it. So there are two things that are happening. Number one, these Shelot and Shuvot are going back and forth and become the source for future books of halacha, which we're going to see soon. In addition to that, this is the beginning of the Siddur. The first Siddur that we have, on the big shot, the first Siddur that we know of, at least remember, Siddur, the word Seder, it's an order. The moment that we have, the basis for not only the actual words, but also the halachot, the rules about tefillah, are now just coming into focus, are just now happening. And the first one is by Rav Amram Gaon and Rav Sadia Gaon. Rav Amram Gaon's Siddur and Sadia Gaon's Siddur are available to this day. You can find them online. You can find printed copies of them. And they form the basis of all future Siddurim. Yes, Judy. And I'm going to repeat it for the video. Yes. Right.
By the time you answer my question is over.
Correct.
One. Number two, are you telling me there were no local authorities
No.
to whom they could turn?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question. Number one, if a person lives far away from Babylonia, they send a letter. By the time they get their answer, it could be moot. The person could be dead by that point. Who knows? Secondly, like guys on life support, what do I do? I'll let you know in 6 months. And secondly, weren't there any local authorities? So the answer is as follows. Yes, there were local authorities. And they would turn to them. But when it was above their pay grade, as we say, then they had to turn to the Gaonim. And it would not be something that would be getting an immediate answer. So they couldn't ask on Erev Sukkot, is my schach kosher? And write that. Obviously not. But it had to be questions, sorry? Is the chicken kosher? Right, exactly. So they couldn't send such a letter. They couldn't send a picture. Photography hasn't been invented even yet. I mean, just to think of how little they had, that of course they were considered modern. And
Send a request to like a copy of the letter in the next 4 to 5 days.
right, exactly. Yeah, I mentioned before, Moshe Soloveitchik in Chicago. He and I were very good friends. He's Rav Aaron's son, his son, the nephew of the Rav. So talk about genius. I can't even begin to explain his genius. Anyways, so morning. So I one time called him up with the Shiloh because I would ask him some questions and I couldn't get a hold of my posek, Rav Schwartz. And he usually got back to me right away. But once he called me like 3 or 4 days later, he says, I hope you weren't calling about someone who was on like life support and needed an answer right away, because I really apologize for delaying. So number one, so for Judy, you answer, the question is, yes, they would ask local authorities. There were definitely Rabbanim. They had the concept of smicha, but not the same as in Israel yet. And they would send questions that had more longer term ramifications. Like explain, I'm making something up, which ended up becoming the Siddur. Like, how do we organize our davening? What are we supposed to do? So those kinds of questions went to the Gaonim. They would go back and forth with questions and answers. And you have books to this day. You can go online. By the way, if you're not familiar with the website called HebrewBooks.org, become familiar with it. You can almost find anything on there. HebrewBooks.org is on. They have, I think, 157,000 books online, free. You can just download them, read them online. They have anything from they have too many kitvei yad, hand manuscripts, but they have stuff like, you want to look at a Talmud Bavli from like the 1700s, what it looked like. You couldn't find it. You couldn't find it. So HebrewBooks.org, fabulous source. So how does this impact the future? Meaning, what we're doing here is we're looking at going from Har Sinai to today and the evolution of halacha we're coming put the Pirke Avot into this framework eventually next week, Bezrat Hashem, I hope. So how does it impact this time period, the Gaonim, of all these letters going back and forth? So again, one thing that we still have to this day are Sidurim based on Amram Gon Sidur and Rav Sadia Gon Sidur and the halachot that go with them. But on a much broader scale, this becomes the basis for a lot of the Jewish law books that are about to become available. What does that mean? That's a very broad statement. So now we're going to move into, that was the Gaonim in about 5 minutes. Okay, this is a 400-year period. I just did in 5 minutes. Again, Jewish history class one day. I'm going to go much more into depth. That's right, Hashem. The Rishonim. Just as a general idea, the Rishonim mean the first ones, and then we are living the time of the Acharonim, meaning the latter ones, or the later ones. Not the last ones, but it means the later ones. One of the reasons we have these kufot, or these time periods in Jewish history and / Jewish law, is that there's certain rules when it comes to psak halacha, deciding a halacha, that certain generations cannot go and reverse a decision of an earlier generation unless it's found to be whatever issues. The Rishonim. This spans the time period from approximately 1040 till approximately 1500. Again, this is a little loose, but we're talking about, again, another 500-year period of time. This is probably the biggest area of growth in the world of Torah law, not just promulgation of Torah and teaching Torah, but the foundation for what we have today as far as halacha. I'm going to name some names for you. These names, probably all of them are familiar to you. If not, it's okay. Rabbeinu Gershom, Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, Rambam, Radak, Ramban, Rush, Rif. These names are major players of Jewish history, major players in Judaism and in Jewish law. Just as an aside, Ramban, by the way, one of the ways we distinguish when we speak between the Rambam and the Ramban, we'll talk about the Rambam more, is the Rambam, we say Rambam with the accent on the first syllable, which is Mil'el, and Ramban and Milra, we put the accent on the second symbol. Even though you don't, when Hebrew speakers say it, they still say Rambam and Ramban. But okay, that's fine. I'll get over myself. The Ramban was famous for many things that we already know, is his commentary on Torah, his commentary on many things. But one of the things that we kind of tend to forget with all these Gedolim, whether it's the Rush or the Rambam or the Rif, they were people. They had a life. Like, everyone knows, okay, the Rambam was the doctor for the Sultan in Spain, and he came, the stories that he was so exhausted at the end of the day that he would lay across the donkey and his boy would pull him home. Okay, all these stories. But the Ramban, not only was he a massive commentator, but also he was a champion of Jewish people. There was a Jew named Pablo Cristiani. Well, how can he have a name like that? Because there's apostate. He threw Judaism away, and he complained to the king of Spain that the Jews, look at the Talmud that just talks, the Jews want to kill the non-Jewish world, and they're the best. They had what was called a disputation. Some of you are familiar with this. There's a movie that was made. Quality is pretty good. The movie itself is pretty good, called The Disputation, if you want to look for it on YouTube, where there's a public trial. The Jews are put on trial. This is not the first nor the last. I have a book at home about various disputations over the centuries. The Talmud and the Jews are put on trial. Basically, was that Ramban was going against the church elders. It was held in front of the king, I think in Aragon, in Spain, right? Wow, I don't know where I got that. It was all the way back here in the cobwebs. And eventually, at the end of the day, the king said, "Look, you lost, Mr. Ramban, but you were good. You did a good job. So we're not going to kill you guys. we're not going to kill you." So very nice of the king. Eventually, of course, they expel all the Jews and the whole whatever. Okay, so in any case, let's talk about the Rambam for a few minutes, which we're going to talk about 3 people. They're known by their name and by their book. Rambam, Rav Moshe ben Maimon. We're going to talk about the Rabbeinu Yaakov, who's also known as the Bal HaTurim. And then we're going to talk about Rav Yosef Karo / Rav Moshe Yisraelish, who become the Shulchan Aruch. Those are the 3 or 4 people we need to talk about. I'm not giving you their biographies. We need to look at them in the terms of what they did for us. halacha books writing. So now let's put one thing in perspective. The year's 1475. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. 1475, the first Jewish books are printed. So what I'm about to tell you about, which we're going to start with the Rambam, is a couple hundred years before that. No books yet. Again, what do we have? We have Mishnah, we have Tanakh, Mishnah, we have Gemara / Talmud. We have starting to have handwritten books of these questions and answers from the Gaonim. That's it. That's the corpus of Jewish law at that point. Remember, when we started this 3 weeks ago, we said that everything except Tanakh is Torah Shebe'al Peh, is the oral law. But everything's being written down now, because as we get wider spread around the world and people are not as close to the original Masorah of Har Sinai, people forget, and there's things that fall by the wayside. So everything's put down in writing, handwriting, not computer. So the Rambam, just for frame of reference, he's born in the year 1135, sorry. 1135, he's born. He comes after Rashi. The reason I'm pointing that out, Rashi wrote a kina that we say on Tisha B'Av, a kina he lived during the time of the Crusades. He witnessed it. Actually, he wrote one of the slichot that we say, I think that Ashkenazim say on the night of Tisha B'Av was written by Rashi. One of those or the morning. I forgot which one it was. And so he lived in 1095/1096. Here, watch this. Godfrey de Bouillon sends the Christians on their way to, massacre Jews, massacre Muslims, just whatever, just kill Jews. And so Rashi is before. And the reason I mention that is I've actually had people ask me, I don't understand how come Rashi doesn't quote the Rambam sometimes. Well, the Rashi and Rambam never met. Okay, they're different. They're years and years and years apart. Because if Rambam's born in 1135 and Rashi's nearing the end of his life in 1096, so they didn't live in the same time period, same kufa, the Rishonim, but not that close. So, but Rambam knew all the stuff that was written by the Gaonim that he had his hands on. He knew the stuff that was written by, anything Rashi, anything that came before him. The reason I'm skipping Rashi is that although he was probably one of the greatest Torah scholars in Jewish history, it's not germane to our topic right now. Germane to our topic is halacha and the evolution of halacha. He goes from Spain to Morocco to Egypt, Spain to Morocco to Israel to Egypt. And he writes, he comes to a decision that pretty much all of us probably would be struggling with if we lived at this time period. Ribono shel olam, I don't know what to do. I can't get a hold of my rabbi, or I get my rabbi, but he needs to look in a book to look up how to do X. What's the bracha on this? How do I build the sukkah? Do I put the mezuzah straight or do I put it on an angle? It's a machloket. Actually, machloket is it straight or is it flat? That's why the Ashkenazim have it on an angle, which is one of the reasons also. The Rambam says, interesting enough, sorry, I'm really digressing here, that when a person enters their home, they meet the mezuzah. What does that mean? Which is interesting because the Rambam was Sfaradi. By Sfaradim, the mezuzah is straight up and down. The other opinion was it goes flat like this. The angle is a compromise. So one of the idea, the mussar of this is that when you're about to enter your home and when you leave your home, think about in terms of compromise, because not everyone gets along exact things the same way. We have to compromise on things. So we walk in the door, we think of compromise, we leave our door, go out in the world, we have to compromise. Okay, so I actually really like that idea. It's not my idea. I've heard this multiple times. Anyways, so you're sitting here and we don't have books. We have a Mishnah, we have a Talmud, we have a Shiel Tov, which may be Shelot and Shuvot and all that, but I can't start sifting through all this stuff and looking everywhere for if I need an answer. Even the rabbi was saying this. Along comes the Rambam. Just like I said, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi made a sea change in Jewish history by writing and compiling the Mishnah, finishing it around the year 200. The Rambam does the next major step. This is approximately 1,000 years later. So again, putting it into perspective, from the year approximately when the Rambam lived till now, there was no Rambam. Let's just say, put it in that perspective. All you have is the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Shelot and Shuvot. That's it. That's all you had. Along comes the Rambam and says, Adkan, we need to do something. And he decides to compile the corpus of all Jewish law into one set. Now, when I say all Jewish law, I mean all Jewish law. Everything, whether it applied or didn't apply, but doesn't apply in Jewish law. He has a whole section on korbanot, sacrifices, tuman tara, ritual purity and impurity, everything, to the point where he said this is the only book you need. The Rambam believed that if I'm Baruch Hashem, B'yayin Hara, B'ezrat Hashem, Minshat, all those nice things. Next week, I'm finishing the Rambam. It's a 4.5-year cycle, approximately. And it's Baruch Hashem, it's a big accomplishment, but when you go through it, he's like, how did he know all this stuff? It's what a genius. I mean, so many of these people are such geniuses. Their brain power is just so massive. So what did he do? He compiled this into 14 sections. Now remember, the Mishnah is in 6, right? The Shisha Sidvei Mishnah. He makes 14 sections, and it's important to know that. Why? Because he calls his book the Yad HaChazakah, the strong hand. Okay, so like referring to Hashem, Yad HaChazakah, but Yad is Yud Dalet is 14 in Gematria. So he calls it Yad HaChazakah. It's also known as the Mishnah Torah Shel Rambam. It's also just known as the Rambam. If anyone just says it's in the Rambam, that's what it's referring to. The Yad HaChazakah or the Mishnah Torah. That's what that's referred to. And he does in fact have the area of halacha all over. It covers every area of halacha in a very misudar way. It has halachot of every chag and how you build the sukkah and what a shofar looks like, everything. He has a section that has to do with Kiddush HaChodesh, of the new moon and the new month, where he just deals with constellations and stars and all. I read it. I can't say I understood more than 3 of the words. It's very difficult. It's very heavy stuff. But he had one regret. Anyone know what his regret was when he finished his work? Only one. He didn't source any of his material. There's no footnotes that say where the Rambam gets this from. And the reason he regretted is someone asked him a question when it came to halacha and gitin. And he said, I don't remember where I got this. And based on that, he said, I regret the entire book that I didn't, not that he wrote it, but they didn't put down sources for everything. That was his one regret. Yet he still held that it was important that this be the book that everyone has in their home. Now that becomes the very first time Jewish law is codified, from the word code, like code of Jewish law. It's the first time Jewish law is codified, tomato. And we finally have, for the first time since Har Sinai, more than 3,300 years ago, we finally have a set of books of halacha. First time. That's hard to believe that we went from approximately from about 3,300 years ago to just 1,000 years ago with no book of halacha. It also says a lot about the time period, because it also means that the way things work in Judaism, I imagine the rest of the world too, but we're only focused on Judaism, is that things change based on necessity. Why is it that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote when he did the Mishnah? It was necessary. Why did the Rambam write it by the time he did? It became necessary. Evidently, there was enough knowledge and be able to share it all between the Gaonim and the people that they could, in fact, have this information. But he saw a big black hole that he decided to fill. So the Rambam has many, many commentaries, interesting, cute names. Also, there's the Mechomat Hashem, there's the Ravid, the Ravad, who's the main commentary, who very often disagrees with the Rambam, very often. There is now, we can't say these kind of things, but that time period, it was meant very respectfully. He would say something, the Ravid would say something about the Rambam to the extent like this: he's wrong. He doesn't know, and I'm saying it almost exact. He's wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and what a waste of ink when he wrote those words. Wow. Pretty strong. You and I can't say that, but where the Rambam became adopted in the Jewish world, mostly, besides all Jews, it's the main. Every Jewish home should have a Rambam. Is the world of Brisk, the Brisker world. The Brisker world, the descendants of Reb Chaim Brisk, Soloveitchik family, that's like their wheelhouse. I hate that word, but whatever. Okay, it's their wheelhouse. That's their main thing. And what's the fun with the Rambam also? By the way, YU is very big into this, and I'll tell you also why it's very proposed from Malei Adumim, is finding what are called stirot, or contradictions in the Rambam. There's millions of words. So he says one thing here, and he says it over here differently. Why? The Rambam was exact. He's very exacting in his words. And therefore, because of that, when he says something here one way, he says something here another way. Why does he do that? When he talks about, for example, the order that when it says that people who, when you go out to war, so the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, the one who was the Kohen who was in charge of the battle, would announce to the people, whoever built a home and hadn't lived in it yet, whoever got married, whoever planted a vineyard didn't yet reap from it, they can go back home. He puts it in a different order than the Torah. Why? Well, there's a reason. So there's all these things in the Rambam that people make their life out of trying to make it understand the Rambam. Rabbi Novich Zatzal, the Rosh Hashiva from Birkat Moshe, he was known as the world's authority on the Rambam. Number one world authority on the Rambam. He's written extensively. He has a whole set of svarim. I only have one volume. It's many, many volumes. I still have to get them from the yeshiva about the Rambam. He was the again acknowledged world authority in the Rambam. And if you go into the Beit Midrash, you'll see a lot of stuff on the Rambam. You can tell a lot about the yeshiva's derech and life and what they teach based on when you look at the books they have on the shelf. You go into a Beit Midrash, you see all these books on Rav Kook, or you see or Rav Soloveitchik, or you see Satner stuff. It all depends on what the derech is. But here you see a lot of stuff on Rambam and Yerushalmi, by the way, too, which is really good. Okay. Pause on Rambam, moving on to the next a couple generations later. There's a man named the Rosh, Resh Aleph Shin, Rabbeinu Asher. We're not going to talk about him, but I'm mentioning his name because he is a commentary. Not only is he a commentary on the Gemara, he's also a posek. He's one of the sizes of halacha, who's very, very big. He spans the Ashkenazi and Sfaradi world. He was Ashkenazi, and he moved into the Sfaradi world because he had to move. He was chased out where he was by the non-Jewish world. There's a series, I think you're the one who told me about. Did you tell me about the Rabbis on the Run? Is it you? Someone told me there's a series of videos done by a speaker in LA called Rabbis on the Run. It's a great title. It's about rabbis who had to leave their communities, such as Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, who wrote Mesilat Yesharim, which we just finished, that they were threatened or there was problems either with the Jewish community or the non-Jewish world. So the Rush had to run. And mentioning him because he's a stepping stone to where we're going to. His son was named Rabbeinu Yaakov. He's also known as the Baal HaTurim, as in HaTurim, like the stop HaTurim where you get up on the light rail. Okay. This is another gigantic jump in the world of halacha. Let me explain. About 150 years after the Rambam, Rabbeinu Yaakov is sitting in his study one day. Obviously, I'm making the story up, but this part, because I have no idea. He's sitting in way, and the light bulb goes out over his head, but there's no light bulbs yet. But just assume there's a light bulb. It goes on over his head. He says to himself, it's been 150 years since the Rambam wrote his work, and we've had some massive poskim, giant decisors of halacha, who've lived between the time of the Rambam and now, including my own father, the Rush. And there's the Rif. Yeah, the Rambam, there's a lot more out there now. And there's a lot more topics that he maybe didn't relate to yet. And also there's certain people who disagree with the Rambam. We didn't have to accept everything he said on face value. We need to have another book. We need to have a book, and he divides Torah into 4 main sections. It went from 6 to 14. Now we're down to 4. We'll see why. The word tur means column, like you have like a tour in not tor taf vav resh, which is like standing in a line, but tur tet vav resh. It's a column. Like you have a tour in the newspaper, you could have a column in the building. You can that's an also amud. He divides the body of Torah of halacha into 4 main branches. 1. Or a Chaim. By the way, I will also when I send out the video for today, I'll send in the group. I'll send the list of these 4 branches. Maybe I'll send a link about what they are, so you don't have to remember. Orach Chaim, Aleph Vav Resh Chet Chaim, which is day-to-day life. How to wash your hands in the morning, how do you keep Shabbat, Chagim, day-to-day life. How to make tzitzit, how do you make tefillin? What makes a Torah Sefer Torah puzzle? How you act in shul? Some people seem to be absent that day, or that year. Anyways, and so Orach Chaim is the first section, and this is no particular order, but the Orach. By the way, the Orach Chaim, jumping way ahead to the 1930s, actually 1920s. The main modern day commentary written on the Orach Chaim is the Mishnah Berurah. So if someone says, I learned the Mishnah Berurah, I have the Mishnah Berurah, it's the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir a Kohen, who wrote the commentary on the Mishnah Berurah. And I'm going to tell you a story why I'm mentioning that now. And he comments the Mishnah Berurah only on that section. There's 4 sections of what will become Shulchan Aruch. We're going to come to. Right now, it's just called the Arba Turim, or the Tur. So right now, we talked about the first section, is the Orach Chaim, what it is. Just a digression for a story. I went to regular day school. I went to Yeshiva High School. Then I went to Shalavi. I went my first year. Then I went my second year. So I had some basic background in Torah, I would say. In my second year, we were going to learn Masechet Shabbat. I went to one of the older guys and I said, I was over 18 or 19. I went to a 20-year-old. Ooh, it's old. I went to one of the older guys and said, could you do me a favor? It probably wasn't your brother, by the way. I learned with her brother over Shalom. And I said, we're about to learn Masechet Shabbat. I also want to learn Hilchot Shabbat. In Kfar, I should learn more of Hilchot Shabbat. What would be a good introduction to learning Hilchot Shabbat? He said, well, why don't you read the introduction of the Chavetz Chaim to Hilchot Shabbat in the beginning of the 3rd volume of Mishnah Berurah? I said, okay, but why would the Chavetz Chaim write something about the Mishnah Berurah? He looked at me like, what? I said, why would the Chavetz Chaim write anything in the book about the Chavetz Chaim, about the Mishnah Berurah? He says, are you mental? It's just like that. He said, didn't you learn anything? And I'm going like, what are you talking about? He said, don't you know the Chavetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah? Well, my world fell apart. I said, you mean that I went through day school, Shiva High School, 1 year post high school, and I never knew that? And I share that story because it taught me a very big lesson. Never assume someone knows something. Make it clear. Make it clear.
Okay, so, never asked him a question.
No. No. So the Chavetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so let's go back to our time here. So we're in the middle of so we have the 4 Tur, the Arba Turim, or the 4 Tur. Number 1 is Orach Chaim. The next one we have is no particular. Even Ha'ezer, Aleph Bet Nun, Ha'ezer, Hey Ayin Zayin Resh, is rule the halachot that have to deal with marriage, divorce, vows, and associated stuff. Chalitza, Yibum. The next section, Choshen Mishpat. Choshen Mishpat is civil law. Modern terms, your car crashed into mine. There's a leak in your plumbing. It damaged somebody, my neighbor. What am I responsible for? What they're responsible. All these civil how our lives interact on a human personal interaction and damages. That's again very broad. The last section, I did 3, Orach Chaim, Even Ezer, and Choshen Mishpat. The last one is Yoredeah. When someone says they learned and became a rabbi, what that means is, what did they learn besides Gemara and Mishnah and Halacha? What Halacha did they learn? So over the centuries, it's changed as to what the curriculum would be. Like, for example, when I was learning to become a rabbi, I also learned Hilchot Shechita. I actually learned Shechita to do it. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Now they don't teach that. It's not practical anymore. Why? In almost every case, when a rabbi becomes a rabbi, with very little exception nowadays, they don't really need to know the halachot, the checking the chicken to see if it, because the way the things have progressed. So they learn, when they become a rabbi, you learn Yoredeah, which is Isser Beheter, like kosher, not kosher, treif, how to shaft, how to salt kosher meat, milk and meat mixtures. I put my basari spoon into my chalavi pot. That's all in Yoredeah. They learn Yoredeah, and hopefully certain areas of Orach Chaim, especially Hilchot Shabbat. In Yoredeah, you also find the halachot of Avelut, Birkei Cholim, Mezuzah, Talmud Torah. It's a very, very wide range of topics in a Choshen Mishpat, in Yoredeah. He has the tour is on many people's bookshelves in their homes. It's not one of those, it's from the hundreds of years ago, even though it is. He wrote the work, and as happened with many other works of halacha, there were people who wrote commentaries on his work, because he would have not just this is halacha, this is halacha, this is halacha, that comes next. The tour had long, expansive paragraphs with some background, with some information. And along comes a man named Rabbi Yosef Karo. His name has to mean something to you. If it doesn't, it will mean something to you from this point on. Rabbi Yosef Karo writes a perush or commentary on the tour. It is called the Beit Yosef. You have the Beit Yosef Shchita, okay? That's because of Rav Avad Yosef. But it's taken from the Beit Yosef. The commentary written on the tour was by a man named Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he called it the Beit Yosef, using his name. If you open up a tour, you'll see there's like this much text of the tour and massive amounts of writing from the Beit Yosef. What is he doing? He's expanding on halacha, giving other examples, comparing, contrasting, disagreeing sometimes, and coming up with his own psak of halacha. Sometimes it goes against the tour. Then he says, look, what I did after you finished all this work, I kind of have it, what I did, I left it out of the hands of the average person in the street. Because the amount of words, again, he didn't say it exactly this, I'm putting words into his mouth at the moment. The amount of words I wrote and the vast expanse of what I wrote, if someone really still wants to know the halacha, you still have to slog through a lot. Yes, there's the Rambam, but since the Rambam, remember, now it's over 150 years have passed, many more halachot have been promulgated, more information, more poskim that sometimes disagree with the Rambam. And to find the answer, to start going through all my stuff, it's going to be a little bit harder. What does he do? This becomes the next giant change in halacha that affects us to this day. That is, he writes the book called the Shulchan Aruch, or the Shulchan Aruch. He takes these 4 sections of the Torah and his commentary, which is massive. He whittles it down into literally Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, halacha. Straight halacha. What do you do? How do you do it? When do you do it? Who has to do it? Etc. He divides it into categories, such as Hilchot Shabbat, into sections called Simanim, a Siman, and then into Seifim, paragraphs. So if I say, for example, where do you find it? If I had a whiteboard, I'd put this up here. But like, if you have the notation, Aleph Vav Chupchik Chet stands for Orach Chaim. You start off even earlier. Shin Vav Chupchik Ayin Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, and you put Siman Kuf Nun Aleph Seif Bet. No matter what Shulchan Aruch you open in the world, you will find, if you open up Siman Kuf Nun, let's go say Shin Chet, I think has to do with, I don't remember for sure. Okay, you'll find, let's say it's Hilchot Muktzah. So you're going to find that's where that is, Hilchot Muktzah. And you'll say that's the topic and Seif Bet. Okay, so it becomes a massive change. Again, we went from Mishnah. The next thing is 1,000 years later, the Rambam. 150 years later is the Tur, who still is still a very big work to get through. And then we come to the Shulchan Aruch. The only drawback to the Shulchan Aruch is he was Sfaradi, and it didn't necessarily apply to all the Ashkenazi world. Because the differences of opinions already, I'm not getting this again, once again, this is our history class. We'd be talking about the growth of Ashkenazi world Jewry and the Sfaradi and where they diverge and how that's not what today's about. We all know there's differences. Some people even change, become Sfaradi. Anyways, so along comes Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. He's pronounced Isserlis, from Krakow, Poland. For anyone who's been in Krakow, you can still go to what's called the Ramah. Resh Mem Chukchik Aleph stands for Rabbi or Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. There's the Ramah Shul, which was his shul in Krakow. He does something that, in my opinion, prevented a huge schism in Judaism. He could have written another book. Why not? He could become famous. He have his own book. Now I'm going to write it. That was the Sfaradim. Now I'm going to write a book for the Ashkenazim. He doesn't do that. He adds what in English what are called glosses or emendations. And he says, let's say if you take a look at a Shulchan Aruch, you'll see the way it's printed, there's a script. There's 2 different types of script. There's regular script and then Rashi script. The regular script is what the mechaber. He's known as the mechaber, meaning the author, also known as Maran, the Arav. He wrote what the Shulchan Aruch wrote, meaning Rabbi Yosef Karo. What the Ramah adds, there's a notation always that says Haggah or emendation, and then it's in Rashi script. That is, sometimes he's either adding something, stam, that the Shulchan Aruch didn't write, and he's just adding to it, or he'll say, Aval anu nohagin, or we do the following. Give you an example. The way that tefillin are put on by Ashkenazim. So that you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it says for the Sfaradim, the way you look in the Shulchan Aruch, it says you sit down, put your shel yad on, you make a bracha. You make a bracha, put your shel yad. You stand up, put your shel rosh on, no bracha. That's the Sfaradi way. Ashkenazim have a different. They stand up for the shel yad and the shel rosh, and they make a bracha here and a bracha here. That was one of the hardest things for me to change, by the way. To say, I kept saying in my head, no bracha, no bracha, no bracha, and I'd say, Baruch Atah Hashem. I still take the bracha for months. It was very hard to break. Every once in a while, I'd say at least twice a year. It happens to me. I still start the bracha. So you say Baruch Shem Kvod, just like you do for us, for Sfaradi. Yeah. Say again. You say Baruch Shem Kvod after the Shel Rosh. You put the Shel Yad, Shel Rosh, and then Baruch Shem Kvod, right? Because maybe it wasn't the necessary bracha, right? That's why. Yeah, maybe. Didn't want to say that. Thank you. No, it's fine. It's fine. So we have that there are hundreds and hundreds of differences between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, and Rav Moshe Isserles decided, instead of making a separate book, I can integrate into there. That's beautiful. That's means we have one book called the Shulchan Aruch. So it's called the Shulchan Aruch, which means what in English? This table that's already set. The commentary, or the additions, I should say, of the Ramah are known as the Mapah, the tablecloth. That's beautiful. It means it goes together. You can't use the tablecloth without the table, right? You can use the table without the tablecloth, but you wouldn't set a nice fancy thing without something under it, right? I would hope. So the inference is that they serve each other, they work together. So what we've done now is we've come to the point in history where the Shulchan Aruch has been finished, and I wrote down the year, I'll keep that in my head. It was in 1563, shortly after the printing press is invented. Unbelievable, it's not unbelievable because it's all Yad Hashem, put world history and Jewish history together, and the Shulchan Aruch, which becomes the #1 reference of Jewish law till this day, is written, is compiled as the printing press comes into being, because God understood, quote unquote, that in order to run with this, you need a printing press, because this is going to be the book. That's why every home has the Shulchan Aruch. It's online. Well, I say you have it on your phone. You have it on your, okay, the Shulchan Aruch and a Rambam. And if you have a tour, that's great. If not. But there's so much out there. There's so much information. What I'd like to do next week is just finish up, hopefully very briefly, maybe 15 minutes, bringing us from the time of the Shulchan Aruch to modern times, a few names and a few books, and then actually get started on Pirke Avot. Okay. When I started preparing for the introductory classes, I assumed it would take me 2, maybe 3. I see it's getting into the 4th. So if you're saying, where the heck is the Pirke Avot already? Sorry, deal with it. So that'll be next week. We'll hopefully, like I say, finish this section, this time period off, and then we'll get into Pirke Avot, which requires a little bit of introduction itself, but nowhere near like this. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.